The phone slipped from my fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor as my hand went numb. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Winters, but your sister withdrew the funds yesterday. She presented documentation showing she's the sole beneficiary of your mother's estate." The bank manager's words echoed in my ears as I stared at the sympathy cards spread across my coffee table. Still in the black dress I'd worn to Mom's funeral, the fabric now feeling like it was choking me at the collar. 4 years of caregiving, 1,460 days of measuring medications, changing bed sheets, and whispering reassurances through pain-filled nights. And Vivian had emptied the accounts before Mom's body was even cold. My name is Catherine Winters. I'm 67 years old, and this is the story of how my sister stole my inheritance while I was caring for our dying mother, and how the librarian in me uncovered the truth that changed everything. If you've ever had your sacrifices dismissed by a family who should know better, subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I sank onto the edge of my sofa, the leather cool against my skin despite the warmth of the May evening. The sympathy cards blurred before me. Your devotion to your mother was inspiring. No one could have cared for her more tenderly. Your sacrifice these past years was a beautiful gift, beautiful words that wouldn't pay my mortgage after 4 years of part-time work and depleted savings. My fingers found my phone again, dialing Vivian's number before I could think better of it. Each ring sent a pulse of tension through my shoulders, knotting the muscles that had already carried so much. "Katie," Vivian answered, using the diminutive I'd always disliked. Her voice carried that familiar lilt of feigned innocence. "How are you holding up, sweetie?" "The bank called," I said, my voice emerging thin and reedy. "They said you withdrew Mom's money." All of it. A pause, then a sigh that sounded rehearsed. "I was going to tell you once things settled down. Mom left everything to me, Katie. The house, the accounts, everything." The hollow feeling in my chest expanded. "That's impossible. Mom told me repeatedly she was leaving the house to me because of the caregiving and splitting the account." "Well, people say lots of things, don't they?" Vivian's tone sharpened slightly. "The will is quite clear. Mr. Peterson has it all documented. Mom must have had concerns about your financial judgment." My throat constricted as if invisible hands were tightening around it. "What are you talking about?" I managed Mom's medications, her appointments, her finances for 4 years while you visited 3 times. 3 times in 4 years, Vivian. Quality over quantity, Katie. Mom and I had a special connection. You were always so practical. Anyway, I need to run. I'm meeting the contractor about renovations to the house. "The house?" My voice caught. "Mom's house." "My house now," Vivian corrected. "I'm having the locks changed tomorrow. If there's anything sentimental you want, you should come by today." The call ended before I could respond. I sat motionless, the phone hot against my palm, as a chill spread across my skin despite the room temperature. Mom's house. The Victorian on Maple Street where we'd grown up, where I'd moved back in 4 years ago when her cancer diagnosis came, where I'd transformed the dining room into a bedroom so she wouldn't have to navigate stairs. The house Mom had promised would be mine in recognition of the care I'd provided. I forced myself to stand, legs unsteady beneath me. In the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized myself, gray-streaked hair pulled back severely, dark circles shadowing eyes that had once been bright with curiosity and purpose. 32 years as a high school librarian had given me a reputation for finding answers, for unearthing information others overlooked. But in the past 4 years, I'd become someone else, a caregiver, a nurse, a human calendar of medications and appointments. 40 minutes later, I pulled into the driveway of Mom's house, the house that had been my childhood home, and for the past 4 years, my full-time workplace as a caregiver. Vivian's Mercedes was already parked in front, alongside a truck from Elite Home Renovations. My key still worked, though the deadbolt was missing. Inside, the familiar scent of Mom's lavender sachets mingled with fresh paint. I followed voices to the kitchen, where Vivian stood with a man in paint-splattered clothes, gesturing expansively. "The whole kitchen needs to be gutted," she was saying. "These cabinets are from the Stone Age, cabinets I'd repainted just last year." Working late into the night after Mom had fallen asleep, wanting to brighten her view from the dining room bed. "Vivian," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. She turned, surprise flickering across her face before settling into a practiced smile. At 64, my sister still maintained the polished appearance that had been her armor since adolescence. Blonde hair expertly colored, makeup precise, clothing expensive and on trend. Next to her, in my funeral dress now wrinkled from sitting, I felt like a shadow. "Katie, I didn't expect you so soon. This is Marco. He's going to transform this dated kitchen into something from this century." "We need to talk," I said, alone. Vivian sighed dramatically, but nodded to Marco, who made himself scarce. Once he was gone, her smile vanished. "There's nothing to discuss, Katie. The will is clear. Mom left everything to me." "That's not possible," I said, hearing the slight quaver in my voice. Mom told you what you wanted to hear," Vivian cut in. "She always did, poor responsible Katie. Always needing validation." The dismissal hit like a physical blow, stealing my breath. 4 years of bathing, feeding, medicating Mom while Vivian lived her life in another state. And now she was painting me as the needy one. "I want to see this will," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "Mr. Peterson has it. You can make an appointment." She glanced at her watch. "Now, if you want to collect any sentimental items, I suggest you do it quickly. The estate sale people are coming tomorrow." Estate sale. The words landed like stones. Mom had been gone less than a week. As I stood in the kitchen, where I'd prepared countless meals for Mom, measured medications, and held her hand through the worst pain, something shifted inside me. A question began forming, unfurling slowly like a page being turned. What would the librarian in me do with a mystery like this? The next morning, I sat across from Mr. Peterson, the family lawyer, in his wood-paneled office. The leather chair beneath me felt ice-cold against my skin, despite the warmth of the day. On his desk lay a document that threatened to unravel everything I thought I knew about my mother's final wishes. "I understand this is difficult, Catherine," Mr. Peterson said, sliding the will toward me. "But the document is quite clear. Your mother left everything to Vivian. It was executed 6 months ago." My fingers trembled as I reached for the papers. Mom's signature looked strange, slightly larger than her usual careful script. After decades of helping students authenticate historical documents in the library, I'd developed an A for inconsistencies. Something felt wrong. "This doesn't make sense," I said, my throat tightening. "Mom told me repeatedly she was leaving the house to me because of the caregiving and splitting the account." Mr. Peterson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Vivian mentioned you might be upset. She said your mother was concerned about your financial management skills. Something about a bankruptcy years ago." The bankruptcy lie hit me like a physical blow, sending a jolt of heat from my stomach to my face. It was Vivian who'd filed for bankruptcy after her divorce, not me. I'd helped her with the paperwork. Now she was using my help against me, rewriting not just Mom's will but our entire history. "I've never declared bankruptcy," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "That was Vivian, after her divorce from Richard. I helped her file the paperwork myself." Mr. Peterson's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. Well, regardless, the will is legally executed, witnessed by 2 parties. I leaned forward, studying the witness signatures. Dorothy Chambers and Martin Webb. The names meant nothing to me. "Who are these people?" "Friends of your mother's, I believe," he replied, though his eyes didn't quite meet mine. 4 years I'd spent as Mom's primary caregiver. I knew every friend who visited, every neighbor who brought casseroles, every church member who called. I'd never heard these names. I left Mr. Peterson's office with a copy of the will clutched in my hand, my mind racing. Instead of going home, I drove to the small cafe where I met my son Thomas whenever he visited from Seattle. Cynthia, the owner who'd served me countless consolation coffees during Mom's illness, took one look at my face and brought over a mug without being asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Catherine," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Maybe I have," I replied, spreading the will on the table. "Did you ever hear Mom mention friends named Dorothy Chambers or Martin Webb?" Cynthia frowned, her forehead creasing in thought. "Never. And your mom talked about everyone who mattered to her, especially these last few years when you were caring for her." I nodded, a cold weight settling in my stomach. "That's what I thought. What's this about?" she asked. I explained about the will, the emptied accounts, Vivian's claims. With each detail, Cynthia's expression darkened. "That's not right," she said firmly. "Your mom was in here with you just 2 months ago. She was talking about how she was leaving you the house because of all you'd done. She was clear as day about it." A small flame of validation flickered in my chest. "Would you be willing to put that in writing?" "Absolutely," Cynthia said, without hesitation. "And I bet others would too. Pastor Jim, for one. Your mom told him the same thing at church." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by papers. The suspicious will, Mom's medical records showing heavy medication during the period when the will was supposedly signed, a list of her actual friends and acquaintances. The librarian in me was awakening, methodically building a case file. My phone rang, startling me. Thomas's name flashed on the screen. "Mom," he said when I answered, his voice tight with concern. "What's going on?" Aunt Vivian called me. My stomach clenched. "What did she say?" "That you're having trouble accepting Mom's will. That you're making accusations," she said. He hesitated. "She said you've been under a lot of stress with the caregiving, and maybe you're not thinking clearly." The subtle undermining of my mental state sent a chill across my shoulders. This wasn't just about money. Vivian was systematically discrediting me to anyone who would listen. "Thomas, your aunt is lying," I said, surprised by the firmness in my voice. "She's taken everything, $238,000 from your grandmother's accounts. The house worth $75,000. Everything I spent 4 years protecting while providing care. But the will is suspicious at best, fraudulent at worst. The signatures are from people Mom never mentioned, dated when she was on heavy pain medication." There was a long pause. "I believe you, Mom," he finally said. "Aunt Vivian has always been creative with the truth. What can I do?" "I need you to think. Did Grandma ever mention her plans for the house or accounts to you?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Last Christmas, when I visited, she specifically said she was leaving you the house because you'd given up so much to care for her. She mentioned setting up college funds for my kids with some of the remaining money and splitting the rest between you and Aunt Vivian." Another piece of evidence. Another contradiction to the suspicious will. After we hung up, I returned to my research with renewed purpose. 3 days later, I found myself driving past Mom's house, Vivian's house now, according to the fraudulent will. A dumpster sat in the driveway, filled with what looked like Mom's furniture. I parked across the street, a knot forming in my throat. Through the front window, I could see people moving through the house, carrying boxes, an estate sale, just as Vivian had threatened. As I watched, a worker emerged carrying a stack of books to the dumpster. Books. Mom's books. The collection she'd built over decades. The volumes I'd read to her during chemotherapy sessions. Something compelled me to drive away and circle the block. When I returned, the workers were inside and the street momentarily empty. Before I could think better of it, I parked and hurried to the dumpster. The books lay haphazardly atop discarded furniture. Mom's reading chair, the quilt I'd covered her with countless nights, photo albums I'd carefully preserved. I reached for the books, my hands shaking shage, a mixture of grief and anger. A first edition of Jane Eyre. Mom's collection of poetry. A worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird with her maiden name inscribed inside, and there, Beneath a stack of book club selections, a leather-bound first edition of Little Women, the book I'd read to her chapter by chapter during her worst days of treatment. I pulled it from the pile, holding it to my chest like a shield. As I did, something slipped from between its pages, a sealed envelope with my name written in Mom's handwriting. The sight of her familiar script sent a jolt through my body. I glanced toward the house, then quickly tucked the envelope and book into my purse. Whatever Mom had left for me in that book, Vivian had intended it for the landfill. Back in my car, my fingers trembled so badly, I could barely insert the key into the ignition. I didn't open the envelope. Not yet. Some instinct told me to wait until I was safely home, away from prying eyes. As I drove away from what had once been my mother's home, the weight of the book and letter in my purse felt like both a burden and a promise. 4 years I'd spent cataloging medications, hacking symptoms, managing pain. Now I would use those same skills. The meticulous attention to detail, the systematic research approach for a different purpose. The realization didn't come with pain or anger, but with clarity, sharp, clean, and undeniable. For decades I'd been the one accommodating, adjusting, sacrificing. I'd been the one making room while gradually being erased. The thought that formed next surprised me with its certainty. I don't have to continue this pattern. My hands trembled as I sat at my kitchen table. Mom's letter before me like a fragile artifact. The envelope's seal had weakened with time, opening easily beneath my fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper, dated just 3 months ago when Mom was still lucid, before the heavier medications began. My dearest Catherine, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and something has gone wrong. Vivian has been taking money from my accounts. I discovered it too late to confront her. I didn't want my final days filled with conflict. The paper slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, floating to the table like a leaf detached from its branch. I stared at it. Mom's words visible even through my tears. I've created a new will, leaving the house to you, and dividing the remaining assets equally. I've hidden it where only you would think to look, in the first edition of Little Women, on the 3rd shelf of the library, the book you read to me during my worst days. My gaze shifted to the book I'd rescued from the dumpster, now sitting beside me on the table. With reverent hands, I opened it, carefully examining the binding. There, tucked into the spine, was a folded document. You were always my Josephine, strong, dedicated, principled. I'm sorry to place this burden on you, but I know you'll set things right. All my love, Mom. A strange heat rushed from my chest into my neck and face as I unfolded the document. My vision seemed to sharpen, the dim kitchen suddenly coming into crystal clarity. I could see the dust motes dancing in the beam of my reading lamp, the texture of the paper's edge, the official notary seal at the bottom of what was clearly a legal will. Dated just 3 months ago, it left the house to me in recognition of her devoted care during my illness, established college funds for Thomas's children, and split the remaining assets equally between Vivian and me. The witnesses were Pastor Jim and Dr. Vivian, people I knew well, people who had actually been part of Mom's life. For 42 minutes, I sat motionless, reading and rereading the will, examining the signatures, processing the implications. Mom had known about Vivian's betrayal. She had protected her final wishes in the one place she knew I would eventually find, in the book that had sustained us through her darkest hours. I remembered those afternoons in the chemotherapy center, reading about the March sisters while poison dripped into Mom's veins to fight the cancer. How she'd always said I was her Jo, stubborn, literary, fiercely loyal. Vivian had been Amy in her analogy, beautiful, sometimes selfish, concerned with appearances. The first edition of Little Women had been Mom's most treasured possession, a gift from her own mother. That Vivian had tossed it in a dumpster without a second thought spoke volumes. I reached for my phone and called Thomas. I found Mom's real will, I said without preamble when he answered. What? How? I explained about the dumpster, the book, the letter, and the hidden document. That's incredible, he said. But will it hold up legally? The other will is almost certainly fraudulent, I finished. This one is properly notarized, with witnesses Mom actually knew. And I have her letter explaining everything. What will you do? The question hung in the air. What would I do? The librarian in me, the woman who had spent decades helping others find information, who believed in order and process and truth, knew exactly what to do. I'm going to fight, I said, my voice emerging from a place I had forgotten existed, lower, steadier, resonating from my chest rather than my throat. Am I going to reclaim what Mom intended for us? The next morning, I made an appointment with Patricia Rivera, an estate attorney recommended by a former colleague. Her office was modern and bright, a contrast to Mr. Peterson's wood-paneled formality. I laid out the evidence methodically: Mom's letter, the legitimate will, bank statements showing Vivian's withdrawals during Mom's illness, and my documentation of the 4 years of care I'd provided. Miss Rivera reviewed everything carefully, her expression growing increasingly confident. Based on the evidence you've provided, we have a strong case for will fraud and financial exploitation of an elder, she said. The withdrawals during your mother's illness, the suspicious timing of the first will's execution when your mother was heavily medicated, and now this newly discovered will with verification of your mother's handwriting. It's compelling. What about the money Vivian has already spent? I asked. We'll file for an immediate injunction to freeze the remaining assets. As for funds already spent, she'll be required to repay them. She'll claim she can't afford to. Miss Rivera's eyes met mine directly. That's not your problem to solve, Mrs. Winters. For too long, you've been solving everyone else's problems at your own expense. It's time to advocate for yourself with the same dedication you showed your mother. For too long, you've been solving everyone else's problems at your own expense. The words resonated in my chest, like a bell being struck. It was true. I'd spent my entire life accommodating first my parents' expectations, then my husband's career moves, then Mom's illness, and always Vivian's demands and dramas. I'd seen it as strength, this constant giving. But what if it had actually been fear? Fear of conflict, fear of disapproval, fear of being seen as selfish. The thought that formed next surprised me with its clarity. I don't have to accommodate anymore. As I left Miss Rivera's office, I stood straighter, my spine aligning vertebra by vertebra as if remembering its proper position after years of unconscious stooping. The weight of Mom's true will in my bag felt not like a burden now, but like a key to reclaiming not just my inheritance, but my voice. Over the next week, I transformed my dining room table into a command center. The librarian in me emerged fully, creating meticulous documentation of Mom's care, finances, and final wishes, binders organized by date and topic, color-coded tabs marking critical evidence, a timeline of Vivian's suspicious activities alongside Mom's declining health. Miss Rivera had filed for an emergency injunction to freeze the remaining assets and halt any further renovations or sales at the house. The court date was set for the following Monday, just 3 days away. We need to be prepared for Vivian's counter-arguments, Miss Rivera advised during our preparation meeting. She'll likely claim your mother verbally expressed different wishes than what's in this will. I nodded, pulling out a folder labeled Witnesses. I've collected statements from 8 people Mom told about her intentions. Pastor Jim, Dr. Levine, Cynthia, from the cafe, 3 church friends, and 2 neighbors. All confirmed she intended to leave me the house and split the remaining assets. Miss Rivera's eyebrows rose slightly. This is remarkably thorough. I was a librarian for 32 years, I explained, feeling a flicker of pride for the first time in months. Research is what I do. What about the financial exploitation angle? She asked. I opened another folder containing bank statements with highlighted withdrawals. Vivian made 17 withdrawals totaling $238,000 during the last year of Mom's illness. Each one occurred when I was taking Mom to chemotherapy or radiation treatments. Times Vivian knew the house would be empty. As I laid out the evidence, something shifted in my posture. I felt my spine straightening, vertebra by vertebra. as if remembering its proper alignment after years of unconscious stooping. The numbers on the pages came into sharp focus, not just figures but years of my life, my work, my sacrifice. My breathing deepened, each inhale filling my lungs completely for what felt like the first time in months. "There's something else," I said, opening a final folder. I found Mom's medication logs. On the date Vivian's version of the will was supposedly signed, Mom was on 3 times to your normal pain medication dose. Vivian has provided a statement that she would not have been competent to make legal decisions that day. Miss Rivera reviewed the documentation, her expression growing increasingly confident. "Catherine, with evidence this comprehensive, I believe we have an extremely strong case." The validation warmed my chest. For 4 years, I'd meticulously tracked Mom's medications, appointments, and symptoms. Now those same skills were serving a different purpose, reclaiming what was rightfully mine. That evening, my phone rang. Vivian's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated only briefly before answering. "Catherine," she began, her voice honey-sweet in a way that immediately put me on alert. "I think we got off on the wrong foot. This whole situation with Mom's will. It's been stressful for everyone." "Yes, it has," I agreed, keeping my tone neutral. "I've been thinking," she continued. "Maybe we could compromise. I'll give you some of the money, say $50,000. You could use it for a nice vacation after all that caregiving. You deserve a break." The old Catherine might have considered it, might have accepted a fraction of what was rightfully hers to avoid conflict. But that Catherine had been replaced by a woman who understood her own worth. "That's an interesting offer," I said, my voice steady, especially considering the court hearing on Monday. A sharp intake of breath on the other end. "What court hearing?" "The emergency injunction hearing. Didn't your lawyer call you? The assets have been frozen pending review of Mom's actual will. The one she hid in her copy of Little Women because she knew you were taking her money." Silence stretched between us, taut as a wire. "You're bluffing," Vivian finally said, but uncertainty wavered in her voice. "I have the will, Vivian. Properly notarized, witnessed by Pastor Jim and Dr. Levine. I have Mom's letter explaining how she discovered your withdrawals. I have bank statements showing you took $238,000 while she was dying. And I have 8 witness statements confirming Mom's true intentions." Another silence, longer this time. "You've always been so dramatic," she said, but the honey had drained from her voice, replaced by something harder. "No one will believe you over me. I was Mom's favorite. Everyone knows that." "This isn't about favorites," I replied. "It's about evidence. It's about truth. See you in court, Vivian." I ended the call before she could respond, my hand steady as I set down the phone. The tremor that had been my constant companion through years of stress and exhaustion had disappeared. The next morning, Thomas arrived from Seattle. He'd taken emergency leave to support me through the hearing. "Mom," he said, embracing me at the airport, "you look different." I smiled, knowing what he meant. I'd had my hair styled for the first time in years, exchanging my caregiver's practical ponytail for a modern bob that framed my face. I stood straighter. I'd even applied makeup subtle but present. "I feel different," I admitted as we walked to my car. "Aunt Vivian called me," he said. "Tried to convince me you were having some kind of breakdown. Said you'd fabricated evidence." "And what did you say?" Thomas grinned. "I told her I'd seen the evidence myself. And the only fabrication was the will she's trying to pass off as legitimate." Pride swelled in my chest, not just for my own newfound strength, but for raising a son who recognized truth when he saw it. That afternoon, we visited Mom's grave together. The spring sunshine warmed the newly placed headstone as I arranged fresh flowers in the cemetery vase. "I'm doing what you asked, Mom," I said softly. "I'm setting things right." As we turned to leave, I noticed an elderly woman watching us from a nearby bench. Something about her seemed familiar. "Mrs. Winters?" she called, rising slowly. "Catherine Winter?" I approached cautiously. "Yes?" "I'm Dorothy Chambers," she said. "I think we need to talk about your sister and your mother's will," one of the mysterious witnesses. My heart raced as Thomas and I exchanged glances. Another piece of the puzzle was about to fall into place. The courtroom felt smaller than I'd expected, more intimate than the grand chambers of television dramas. I sat beside Miss Rivera at the plaintiff's table, our evidence organized in neat folders before us. Thomas sat attically behind me, his supportive presence a warm comfort at my back. Across the aisle, Vivian sat with her attorney, a sharp-featured man whose suit probably cost more than my monthly pension. She'd dressed for the role of grieving daughter, black dress, subtle makeup, hair pulled back demurely. Our eyes met briefly as the judge entered, and I was surprised to find no anger rising within me, only a calm certainty. "All rise," the Honorable Judge Eleanor Blackwell presiding. The proceedings began with formal introductions and an overview of the case. Miss Rivera presented our evidence methodically: Mom's true will, her explanatory letter, the bank statements showing Vivian's withdrawals, the medication logs demonstrating Mom's incapacity when the fraudulent will was supposedly signed, and statements from 8 witnesses confirming Mom's true intentions. Then came our surprise witness. The plaintiff calls Dorothy Chambers, Miss Rivera announced. Vivian's head snapped up, her composure cracking for the first time. The elderly woman I'd met at the cemetery made her way slowly to the witness stand, leaning on a cane. After being sworn in, Dorothy looked directly at me, then at Vivian, before addressing the court. "I never met Evelyn Winters," she stated clearly. "I was paid $200 to sign as a witness on a will. I was told it was just a formality, that the Lowell witnesses couldn't be present that day." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. "Who paid you, Mrs. Chambers?" Miss Rivera asked. Dorothy pointed at Vivian, without hesitation. "She did. Her and that lawyer of hers, Mr. Peterson." Vivian's attorney jumped to his feet, objecting vehemently. But the damage was done. Judge Blackwell's expression had hardened as she looked toward Vivian and her counsel. What followed was a systematic dismantling of the fraudulent will. Martin Webb, the second witness, had provided a written statement confirming he too had been paid to sign. Mr. Peterson, when called to testify, invoked his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. By the time Vivian took the stand, the outcome seemed inevitable. Her testimony was a masterclass in evasion and deflection. "Mom and I had a special relationship," she insisted, her voice catching theatrically. "Catherine was always jealous of our bond. This new will she's produced is obviously a forgery created out of spite." "Mrs. Brooks," Judge Blackwell interrupted, using Vivian's married name, "are you suggesting that Pastor James Miller and Dr. Sarah Levine, both respected members of this community, are lying under oath about witnessing your mother's true will?" Vivian faltered. They must be mistaken. And the notary public who authenticated the document, is she mistaken as well?" "I don't know," Vivian snapped, her polished veneer cracking. "All I know is that Mom wanted me to have the house. Catherine abandoned her career to play martyr, but that was her choice. Why should she be rewarded for it?" The words hung in the air, revealing more than any evidence could about Vivian's true character. I stood before the judge when it was my turn, my voice emerging from a place I had forgotten existed. Lower, steadier, resonating from my chest rather than my throat. The familiar urge to apologize, to soften, to accommodate others' discomfort didn't come. Instead, a calm certainty flowed through me, warming my limbs, straightening my posture. For 4 years, I administered 12 medications daily. I drove to 187 doctor appointments. I postponed my retirement and lost $96,000 in income to care for Mom. I did this willingly, out of love, not for inheritance. But Mom wanted to acknowledge my sacrifice in her will, and Vivian stole that from both of us. I presented the court with my documentation, the medication logs, appointment calendars, and financial records that chronicled 4 years of devoted care. "I'm not asking for special treatment," I concluded, I'm asking for my mother's true wishes to be honored. Judge Blackwell's ruling came swiftly and decisively. The fraudulent will was invalidated. Mom's true will was recognized as legitimate. Vivian was ordered to return all funds withdrawn from Mom's accounts and to vacate the house within 30 days. Furthermore, the judge referred the case to the district attorney for potential criminal charges against Vivian and Mr. Peterson for fraud and elder financial abuse. Mrs. Winters, Judge Blackwell, addressed me directly. The court recognizes the extraordinary care you provided to your mother in her final years. Your diligence in preserving her true wishes is commendable. Outside the courthouse, spring sunshine warmed my face as Thomas hugged me tightly.
"You did it, Mom," he whispered. "You really did it."
Over his shoulder, I saw Vivian emerge from the building, her attorney speaking urgently in her ear. Our eyes met across the courthouse steps. For a moment, I glimpsed something unexpected in her expression. Not anger or resentment, but a flicker of something that might have been respect. She gave me a small, tight nod before turning away. We wouldn't speak again for many months, and when we did, it would be different. Not healed, perhaps, but honest in a way we never been before. That evening, I stood in Mom's house, my house now, running my fingers along the familiar bookshelves in the library. The first edition of Little Women sat in a place of honor, its aged leather binding catching the last golden rays of sunset through the window. I opened it carefully to the inscription on the first page, written in my grandmother's hand to my mother decades ago. To my Evelyn, may you find your own story between these pages. Mom had found her story, a life of quiet dignity, of love given freely, of wisdom enough to protect her final wishes in a place only I would look. And I had found something too. Not just an inheritance of property and money, but an inheritance of strength I hadn't known I possessed. For the first time in years, I filled my lungs completely, without the constriction of unspoken words or unexpressed boundaries. Whatever came next, I would face it as my complete self, not just as a caregiver or librarian or mother, but as Catherine Winters, a woman who had finally remembered her own worth. 6 months after the court ruling, I stood in the garden behind what was now truly my house, pruning roses in the October sunshine. The property had transformed under my care, much like I had transformed myself. The first month after gaining possession had been devoted to undoing Vivian's hasty renovations. The kitchen cabinets I'd lovingly painted for Mom were beyond saving, but I'd found a local craftsman to create new ones in a similar style. The contractor had been surprised when I showed up with detailed sketches and specific requirements.
"Most clients just leave the decisions to us," he'd remarked. "I'm not most clients," I'd replied, a response that would have been unthinkable a year earlier.
The doorbell rang, interrupting my gardening. I removed my gloves and made my way through the house, noting with satisfaction how each room now reflected both Mom's memory and my own taste, a blend of attic and fresh beginnings.
Thomas stood on the porch with his children, Emma and Jack, ages 10 and 8. "Surprise visit," he announced, the children rushing forward to hug me. "We were in Portland for a conference and thought we'd drive down for the weekend."
"If that works for you," the old Catherine might have scrambled to accommodate, regardless of her plans. The new Catherine smiled warmly but honestly. "I'd love to have you tonight and tomorrow, but I have plans Sunday afternoon. I'm leading a workshop at the library on archival research techniques."
Thomas nodded, no disappointment or pressure in his expression. "Perfect. We'll head back Sunday morning." Later, as the children explored the backyard, Thomas and I sat on the patio with coffee. "You seem happy, Mom," he observed. "It suits you."
"I am happy," I agreed, not despite everything that happened, but partly because of it. "Have you heard from Aunt Vivian?"
I nodded. "She called last month. The DA offered her a plea deal. Restitution and community service instead of jail time. She took it."
"Are you okay with that?" I considered the question carefully. "Yes. Justice doesn't always mean punishment. Sometimes it just means setting things right." The truth was, Vivian's actions had inadvertently given me a gift, the push I needed to reclaim my voice, to remember who I was beyond the roles I'd played for others. That evening, I showed Emma and Jack the library, the room that had become my sanctuary. The bookshelves gleamed with Mom's restored collection, now joined by my own volumes. The first edition of Little Women sat in a special display case, alongside Mom's letter and a photograph of us together during her last Christmas. "Did you really find a secret will in that book, Grandma?" Emma asked, eyes wide with wonder. "I did," I confirmed. "Your great-grandmother was very clever. She knew I'd look for that book because it was special to us." "Like a treasure hunt," Jack exclaimed. "Exactly like a treasure hunt," I agreed. "But the real treasure wasn't the will or even the house." "What was it?" Emma asked. I smiled, finding the words that had been forming in my heart these past months. "The real treasure was remembering who I am when I'm not taking care of everyone else. Sometimes, especially as women, we get so busy nurturing others that we forget to nurture ourselves." Emma nodded solemnly, absorbing this wisdom with the seriousness only a 10-year-old can muster. Like when Mom says she doesn't have time for her painting anymore because she's too busy with us and work. Thomas looked up sharply at this observation, our eyes meeting in silent communication. Perhaps my journey would help him see his wife's needs more clearly. Sunday morning, after Thomas and the children departed, I prepared for my workshop at the library. At 67, I'd never expected to be teaching again, but when the library director, a former student of mine, had asked me to share my expertise in archival research, something had resonated. As I gathered my materials, my phone rang. Vivian's name appeared on the screen. These calls had become monthly occurrences, awkward at first, gradually evolving into something resembling honest communication. "Catherine," she said, when I answered, "am I catching you at a bad time?" "I have a few minutes," I replied. "How are you, Vivian?" "Managing. The community service hours at the senior center are actually not terrible. Some of the residents remind me of Mom." I smiled at the grudging admission. "They have a lot of wisdom to share if you're willing to listen." A pause. Then, "You were right about the will, about everything. I've been thinking a lot about why I did what I did." "And?" I prompted gently. "I think I was jealous," she admitted, the words clearly difficult. "Not of the money or house, but of your relationship with Mom. You had something with her. I never. We had different relationships with her," I acknowledged. "Neither better, just different." "No, yours was better," Vivian said, with unexpected candor. "You showed up. I didn't. I'm trying to learn from that." After we hung up, I sat quietly for a moment, absorbing this small miracle of honesty between us. We would never be close, Vivian and I, but perhaps we could be real with each other at last. At the library that afternoon, standing before a room of eager participants ranging from teenagers to seniors, I felt a familiar but long-forgotten energy coursing through me. This was who I had been before caregiving consumed my identity. A woman with knowledge to share, with expertise valued by others. "Archives tell us stories," I began, "but only if we know how to listen. Today I'm going to show you how to hear the voices preserved in documents, photographs, and artifacts." As I guided the group through research techniques I'd honed over decades, I realized I was sharing more than just professional skills. I was offering a perspective that only my recent journey could have given me about the importance of preserving truth, about the power of documentation, about the stories we leave behind. After the workshop, a woman about my age approached, her eyes bright with recognition. "That bit you said about documents being proof of our existence, that resonated deeply with me. My daughter tries to rewrite our family history sometimes, making herself the hero of every story." I smiled, understanding completely. Documents don't lie. Even when memories and narratives do, that's their power. And their comfort, she added. Driving home as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, I reflected on the strange path that had led me here. Mom's illness, Vivian's betrayal, The hidden will, all painful chapters in a story that was still being written. At 67, I had expected to be winding down, settling into a quiet retirement. Instead, I found myself beginning again, teaching workshops, joining the Historical Society board, even dating occasionally, though that was a story for another day. The house waited for me, warm with memories yet open to new possibilities. As I unlocked the door, I thought of Mom's inscription in Little Women, "May you find your own story between these pages." I had found my story at last, not as a supporting character in someone else's narrative, but as the protagonist of my own life, a woman who had learned, perhaps later than some, but not too late, that her voice deserved to be heard, her boundaries respected, her worth acknowledged. And that, I realized as I stepped across the threshold, was the greatest inheritance of all.